For joining us today for this Family Business 360 webinar. I'm Roger Anderson, the program manager here at the Austin Family Business Program in the College of Business at Oregon State University, and I'm so glad you're here with us today for this great webinar. A couple of notes. Family Business 360 is now in its 6th year of providing education to the family business community, and this is our 3rd year of providing webinars in addition to our regular breakfast events. If you're interested in the other topics available and other events that the Austin Family Business Program provides, you should check out our website at business.oregonstate.edu/familybusinessonline. Today we have a fantastic topic for you. We're talking about who will lead filling leadership gaps in your family business. And we're joined today by Jim Grew, the president of the Grew Company. And we have a lot to get into, and we're going to get to that in a second. I want to introduce Jim first, and then I'll do a couple of quick housekeeping items and then turn it over to him. A strategist, coach, and leadership expert, Jim Grew's unique mix of business experience and advanced psychology training is the catalyst that ignites dramatic shifts in business performance. Jim is a sought-after speaker and expert in the nuts and bolts of successful leadership. His work is based on his experience and his education at Stanford University and Stanford Graduate School of Business. He lives in Portland, but he's here on campus in Corvallis with us today, joining us for this webinar. I also want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, and you'll be able to view this later. If you log in through your computer, you should be hearing us through your computer speakers. On the screen now, if you're reading this, you can also dial in on your phone using the access code and the phone number shown on the screen. That was the same that was in your WebEx confirmation email. And then finally, if you have any questions during this webinar, you have a chat window, probably on the lower right-hand or the right-hand side of your screen, that you can type questions in, which I will see, and then I can pass them over to Jim, and he'll be able to answer them either as we go on or at the end of the session.
As we go on.
As we go on would be great. All right, so without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jim Grew, president of the Grew Company, for the webinar.
Well, thank you. It's now good afternoon. I think all of us think we are learners. I sure do, and I think I'm pretty flexible. I'm married to a physician, and part of that life is training sessions, as you know. For her, it includes sessions in New York City. I called to confirm reservations for next spring and asked about an executive dining room, which we had enjoyed prior, and the man at the desk insisted they didn't have such on the floor where we were staying. I insisted it was there. He insisted it wasn't. He finally said, "I've been here for 22 years. It is on the first floor." At which point, I'm starting to get angry. And we went back and forth, finally went to another person. He was smart enough to get this irate guy out of his hair. And what we learned is that I was thinking of a dining room in a Chicago hotel instead of New York. Now, I was sure I was right. And it was embarrassing. And my wife, who is a psychiatrist, by the way, had a great comment that I'll skip. So the challenge for us is to look forward to a new situation, and this certainly is it. So what's at stake? Well, first of all, the valuation of your business. And what valuation means is the amount of money that the business will be worth as it moves to someone else as ownership. And that can be you sell it to outsiders, to people in the company, to your family. It's all the same thing, but the valuation is a critical piece of your retirement and a sense of the worth in one measure of your life's work. The other thing that's at stake is emotional, probably way more important. Number one, your kids. I'll tell you a story. I worked in a very large corporation in Chicago for 13 years. It was a grocery chain. And the guy who was head of the meat organization, Frank Toohey, was about 6'6", and he had hands the size of automobile tires. He was a great guy with a huge heart. He called everybody kid. So please don't be offended that I'm calling your children, who are now young adults, kids. I just do that. So you have an emotional attachment to your kids, but you also have an emotional attachment to your business because you've spent some significant amount of your life and pain with it. And the reason I'm pointing that out is that what's involved here is very complicated. There's no simple answer. So let's move on. And the first question is, do you love your kids or the business more? I'll say that one more time. Which do you love more, your kids or the business? Yes, that's an impossible question, but that's a question you get to consider. Let's move on to the valuation question, because people make this mysterious. It is not mysterious. Valuation has nothing to do with net worth on your balance sheet. Forget that. This information, by the way, comes from people who value businesses and who buy them and sell them. And I've checked it probably with 25 different people. So here's how you can calculate roughly what your business is worth. And I'll tell you in a minute why that matters. So suppose your annual operating income pre-tax is $1 million. Multiply that times 1.25, you get $1,250,000. Multiply that by 4, which is an average multiplier, and you get $5 million. So if you're making $1 million a year, you have a $5 million valuation on the table. If you're making $500,000, then it's half of that. So this is not trivial. And the reason I point this out is that this is not a number most businesses look at very much. But this is what we're talking about, and this is why this decision is so critical. So the question is, where will you risk failure? Your business or your kid? Just carry that one around, because that's really the issue about filling the gap. Now, even worse, I hate to say this, but the problem is you. Really, yes, really. It's not your kids, not your spouse, not your employees, not your customers. It's you. Every day, companies fill leadership slots. This is common work. This is like producing product and selling it and doing the accounting work. This is not new. So why is it different with you? Well, there's an emotional attachment, which we just talked about. But the hook here is that when it's your kids, suddenly the rules seem to change. And so the question is, how do you make the right judgment for what you really want, which is to take good care of your employees and your business and your customers and your suppliers, and also be fair to your kids? So the first thing to do is plan your exit. Yes, you, not them. Why? Because everybody's wondering what you're going to do. And you impact them well beyond what you imagine. So plan your exit, and then plan your succession, meaning who's going to be the leader after you. Now, this is easy for me to say, but remembering that exit doesn't mean die, but it does mean big change in the way you spend your time. And I don't need to dramatize it. The fact is that the clients that I work with, many of whom own their own businesses, really struggle with this question. It takes them several years, 2 or 3, to move from the theory to actually thinking about transferring power. So don't skip by this. This is it. This is critical for you. So here are examples of steps from where you are to a position which is not on the side but leaves room for somebody else. Let's start with you as CEO. You can be president. The first step is to become chairman, which leaves space for someone to be president. The next step is to be an active owner. The next step is to be a board member. The next step is to be an advisory board member. The difference is an advisory board does not have fiduciary responsibility. And then finally, full retirement. And you figured out that at the top of the pile, you're completely in. At the bottom of the pile, you're completely out as an investor. And in fact, you know this, you always have 2 roles. One is owner and the other is leader of the business. And those are different. And it can be difficult when you're making plans to sort them out. So the solutions to the leadership gap aren't difficult. Either sell or replace yourself, and probably replace some key leaders. It's A or B. There is no C, barring some kind of a catastrophe. So part of my message is don't make this more complicated than it is. Some people want to sell just to get out. They've had enough. They're tired. There are no kids that want the business. There are no kids that they can rely on. or they see an opportunity to make an enormous amount of money, which will change the rest of their life. That's fair. Or if you're going to replace yourself, realize that you are changing the culture and you're probably involved then in replacing key leaders. So here's a quick outline of what is probably the obvious replacement strategies. The first one is set your timetable. This is incredibly hard. I have a client now whose timetable is 5 years and out. We are 18 months into the succession problem, and this CEO still is CEO because we're finding all of the places where the CEO's hand is stuck to the people running the business. So first, set your timetable. Yes, you can adjust it, but set it and tell everybody, this is my timetable, by the way. If it's secret, it doesn't help. Second, start growing a replacement or bring them in, depends on the circumstance in the business. Typically 5 years, yes, 5 years is late. Because if I say to you, how long does it take for you to grow someone who can run your business, assuming that you bring them in and put them into at least one job, if not two, to prove themselves, the answer is 5 years. That's pretty quick. And it turns out that process is the same whether it's a family business or not, because it has to do with leadership skills, understanding culture, ability to influence, and things like that. And the other fundamental, this is Jim's opinion, is that as you think about who's going to be the leader, competence beats family membership. What I mean by that is this. When you are thinking about who is the leader of the business and you have a son or daughter who is bright, interested, wants the job, probably doesn't understand the job because they haven't done it, the question before what you do with them is, what competence will it require to take this business forward? Remember, we're not hiring for the past, we're hiring for the future. One of the problems which I see is owners who promote a son or daughter either before they're ready or into positions that simply don't fit their skills. They should never have been a CEO. And cleaning that up can be painful. So let's talk about the family. Everybody who's got a family business, who's had associations certainly with the Austin Group or others, knows about family meetings. And the short answer is, when your oldest kid is 12, start the meetings. Don't wait. Of course, there are all kinds of things they don't understand, but part of the process is teaching the kids that we talk about these things together and teaching them that it's okay to say, I don't understand that, I don't want that, I would never do what you did, or whatever it is, because at some point you want to know where they are. Number two, of two. There are two roles here available to your kids. One is owner, and the other, as a family member, this slide is confusing, and the other one is owner and leader. They're different. And so always available to your kids is the opportunity to be an owner without having to run the business. Why would you do that? A, they don't want to run the business. B, they are unwilling or unable to learn the skills to do it well. C, there's a huge challenge in running the business and they are not going to get good enough soon enough. And so instead, they can be an owner, they can be on the board, they can be involved without having the full load of running the business. Family roles means what are the members of your family going to decide to be involved in. Bad sentence. But there's an array of possible connections. They can be owners or not. They can be board members or not. They can be board members without a vote. They can sit in meetings as observers but not run the business, and so forth. You can create the list. What I'm trying to suggest is don't assume that automatically whoever is the brightest kid replaces you as president or CEO. That might be best, but it also might not be best. And so allow a discussion of available roles. Family minority owners is a slide because if you are a minority owner in a business, but you're an owner, you're entitled to gather information, to ask questions, to be in the room when major decisions are discussed, but you're not on the hook for the decisions. And that may fit some of the people in your family. A little different cut on that. If you're an owner, these are the kinds of questions that you as an owner will decide. And it turns out it's the same if you are the majority stockholder in a publicly traded business. So that's a little more rare, but it's the same thing. So these are examples of owners' decisions. One of them is the selection process for the senior leader. Who are they? How do we decide what they want, and who do we choose? Another one is, what are the job responsibilities of these key people? Yes, owners should have a role in clarifying what are the responsibilities for the key people, and then what are the qualifications for someone to take on those responsibilities. The reason for that is that these are enormously complex questions, and more eyes of people who are willing to think hard and work hard can produce a better answer. Compensation is a critical question. And one of the problems I'll tell you is this. The best headhunter I know, search professional, if you will, says that what she sees often in the Pacific Northwest is owners who are looking for somebody who is young and cheap. The problem with young and cheap is they're usually not qualified, and then the company is at risk. And remember, it's the valuation of the business that is the thing you're concerned about. And then finally, the timing of any major change is a decision that owners can make. Should they seek counsel? Of course. But this matters to them. Now, let's imagine you brought in a new leader. What is that new leader's job? Well, I'm going to propose things which you may not include in the normal list. So you have a new leader, you like him or you like her, people like her, there's a cultural fit, her instincts seem good, and so forth. So these are the challenges which I would present to this person. Number one, their job is to balance today's results with actions for tomorrow. What that means is you can't keep doing what you did because that engine will slowly run down. Entropy is your enemy. Number two, structure the communication in the business and with the family. That means organize whether it's meetings or emails or smaller groups, and there's an array of communication which must go on. And when there is a family of owners, that communication is essential and is often a stumbling block where well-meaning owners simply aren't working with a full deck of information. It's not about their brains, it's about the data. The next challenge for the new leader is to move the leadership process from dad's head to a management team. What do I mean by that? What is often the case in a family business is that mom or dad or both started the business, they've grown the business, they've been at it for 25 or 30 years, and they have a very sophisticated understanding of the culture, the issues, the risks, what ought to be done, what is not a payday, and so forth. Much of that information, which is crucial for success, is not written down anywhere, or if it's written down, it's incomplete. And so the leader's job is to gradually move information to the management team so they can make competent decisions. The next job is to deliver results for owners, for employees, and for customers. This sounds like some kind of a plaque in the lobby, but the leader's job is to deliver the results in the right way. Next, it's the leader's job to clarify the difference in role between owner and business leader. It is not the owner's job to do that. And the reason for that is that the leader needs to figure out what kind of help she needs, how the owners can be involved, and to negotiate that on what will end up being a shared basis. But the leader needs to take the responsibility to get that done. Finally, the leader's responsibility is to mine the wisdom of the owner cleverly and respectfully. It's hard to say that phrase. I'll say it again. To mine the wisdom of the owner, do it cleverly and do it respectfully. I have a client right now who has hired a superb new president-to-be, and this president is so anxious to do well that he doesn't pay close attention to suggestions from the current owner. And it's a point of friction. The respect part is not something that he understands yet, and we're working on that.
Hey, Jim, if I can
Yes,
jump in real
you
quick.
bet.
I do have a couple of questions.
Oh, good.
Excuse me. And I also want to interject really quick. I failed to mention this at the beginning, but I will make the slides and the other source materials that Jim mentions. I'll email that out to everybody after the webinar is over. But first, I'm going to take these out of order because the first question has to do with this particular slide. And this attendee wants to know if you can address, wants you to clarify, when you're talking about the new leader, are you talking about a family member as a new leader or a non-family member, part A? And then part B, if it's a non-family leader, can you talk about the role of non-family managers to close the gap until the next generation is ready to lead?
Yes, that's a complicated question, and I may ask to have it restated again. So the first question is, am I talking about family members as the new, or a family member as the new leader, or an outsider as the new leader? And my answer is yes. It's both. It isn't any different. Because if you look carefully at this is really two things. It is, you've got to deliver the results, which has to do with leading the people in the business. You've also got to maintain communication with the owners, the family, in ways which are positive, consistent, and frequent. And here's the problem, and I learned this, a number of years ago, working for a guy who was a turnaround specialist, and he had his own work, but what he said to me one Friday was this: I want to know bad news instantly. I mean, literally, the minute you know about it, reach for the phone. If the news is good, take your time. Most of us would rather wait a little on the bad news to kind of metabolize it and work ourselves up to telling whoever it is, the owner of the family. That's a huge mistake. You say, here is how it is. You don't have to have an answer yet, because what you're teaching the owner, the family, whoever it is that when there's a problem, they're going to know about it right away. And if you be the parent of a teenager, the main thing you want to know is when your kid's in trouble, you want to know about it quickly. If you get in a wreck, call me. Don't wait 2 hours trying to figure out some story. It's the same thing. So do the second part of the question again, if you would.
To rephrase it, it had to do with how non-family managers can bridge a gap or close the gap between when the next generation of family is ready to lead, presuming they're not currently.
Yes. So there are several tasks within that simple question. First of all, recognize that the job of the current leader is to prepare the family member to replace him. It's the leader's job to grow the family member. It is not the family's job. Why do I say that? Because most of leadership is hands-on. You don't learn it by reading about it, watching it on YouTube, all due respect to business schools, and I've been to one of the good ones. It's like golf. You don't learn it by watching it on TV. You learn it by picking up a club and hitting a slice and saying, I wonder how I can fix that. So the new leader must take on the responsibility, happily, of grooming, if you will, the family member. And that grooming is a combination of love and blunt redirection. So as a family member, what I would be looking for in talking with people is a feeling of sensitivity, of comfort, of safety, because the young son or daughter needs to be working with someone they admire, that they respect, that they will listen to, that they will allow some coaching from. And if that relationship doesn't occur, and you have a son or daughter who is, let's say, 5 years away from being to stepping into a senior leadership position, then I wouldn't hire that person, because the training is not going to happen at home. That's all theoretical. And let me go on with this to say that about the other side of this is when you have a son or daughter who seems to be interested, and the first question is, are they really interested? And sometimes it's like standing on your head to make that point. Are they really interested? Then the question is, how can they learn the things they need to learn for the business as it is? Here's a problem that's common. When Dad and Mom started the business, it was a business very small. It is now doing 50 times the revenue, and instead of being 5 people, it's 300 people. Those are not the same business. I know this seems obvious, but the dad and mom approach is to say, well, I did it. Why don't you just step in and do it? And the answer is no, you didn't do it. What you did was completely different. It was good, but you grew with the business. And I have a client wrestling with this question right now. So here's some ideas about how to help your son or daughter who wants to step in. One of them is to be frank about the complexity and risk of the job. When I was 23, I could do anything. And the reason my hair is white is I found out I couldn't. We're all like that, and thank goodness for the 23-year-old who will stay up all night to get it done. So here are some ideas in no particular order. Number one, family discussions about ideas and philosophy about leaders and about family in the business. Things like, you got to make a contribution. You got to convince your boss to want you around. These are really obvious. I have a client connection. They're not a client happily. The son, who is 41, believes that he is entitled to run the business. The problem is he's not competent. He's not ready. Everybody in the business knows that, and he is not respected because of his entitled position. And what we're actually doing through his wealth manager for the family, and this is a family with substantial assets, is connecting him with a particular psychiatrist whose focus is on very wealthy, very successful, entitled people, believe it or not. There are lots of them. And the entitlement is a killer because your key people won't work for somebody who feels entitled. It corrupts the discussion. Second, encourage kids who are interested to work in the business somewhere. Lower is better. My dad convinced me to do an absolutely awful job in order to help fund my college. I was working in a lumber mill making laminated beams. These are structural beams. And we stood in the line and wearing rubber gloves, picked these beams up with glue all over them, which meant glue in our hair, down our arms. It smelled bad. I drank 2 quarts of milk every day. I was probably 20 years old. And it was hot. It was terrible. And it was great because the answer was, you got to keep working. You're one of the line. So it isn't that it needs to be a dirty job. It needs to be a real job in the business where the question is, does the kid do the work? And the answer is, no matter where they're headed, they need to understand what's involved with that for reasons which you know. But if you're wondering about it, if they're reluctant to do the work, that's a family discussion. Maybe it's a private discussion. Why is that? They could be afraid of the equipment. Well, find somebody to help them do it safely. But to not do that deprives them of critical connections with the people who actually do the work, which is not the senior people. It's the folks down in the business. Discuss positions with them that could be open to them in the future. So you've just said, we want you to do this ugly, awful work. It smells bad. You will smell bad. You'll be filthy when you come home. Why would somebody want to do that? And the answer is because if you do that well, you will be considered to do this kind of a job or that kind of a job. And so I'll go through the pain in order to get that reward. We're all like that. Talk about how the decision will be made to promote your son or daughter. It isn't magic. And if you are running the company, you are going to make the decision, but you're going to listen to other people that work with you. Talk about that. It isn't weird. It is not the same as mowing the lawn for dad. And you got to tell your kid because they don't know. This may be the most important thing in this list, and that is make working in the business an option. This is really tricky because if you're a parent and you're proud of your kids, and I have 2 daughters who are grown with kids and they're in their 40s, I think my daughters are awesome. They're fabulous, right? I'm a typical parent. They happen to be awesome. No, actually, they really are. But maybe your kid does not want to work in your business, and that may be very hard for them to say. And so this is one where if you are not succeeding in getting a frank conversation about this, get outside help. This is really important because otherwise your son or daughter goes into a job they hate. They will either be miserable for life or do a lousy job. In either case, you teed them up into a bad circumstance. Don't do that. Give them room and space. And the timeline is theirs, not yours. And obviously everybody says this, but have them go work for somebody else. When they go there, they'll get real feedback, and they won't wonder, well, my dad's just saying that because he's my dad and he sort of ignores all the bad stuff I do, which is destructive. Then here are some questions before we get to managing the shift that I would ask once your son or daughter is working in your business. The first is, how are they performing in their current job? How do you find out? Go ask their boss. And if you can't get a straight answer, find somebody who can go get a straight answer, because you want to know. And if it's all good or all bad, you didn't get the answer. But what you want to know is, does the kid know what the kid needs to work on? My daughter that I just raved about was a hostess in a restaurant, and I remember her coming home and saying, Dad, she was 19 or 20. She was working as a hostess. Dad, they said if I'm late once more, they'll fire me. And I said, yeah. Dad? And that lesson, she can still recite it. That was 25 years ago. She realized, no, there's things you do here if you want to work here. And I thought I had taught her about being on time. Clearly, she needed that from somebody else. Find out how the supervisor evaluates them. Yeah, we've got a question, it sounds like.
Oh, I do have another question. Yeah. You actually inadvertently answered it, I think, in the last section.
Okay.
This person just wanted to know, as a member of the younger generation, how do I approach my parents about talking about being ready to assume leadership?
Oh, interesting. I would love to know how old you are, but we'll skip that. Here's how it works, and go jump in their seat for a minute. When you say you're ready, what ready means is I'm willing to do the work to develop the skills to be really good at this. Not necessarily I'm ready to be president. There's an old joke that says everybody wants to be CEO and nobody wants to do the work of being a CEO. And so if you're ready, say so. I'm ready. And that means you're ready to go do the work to get good at this. And here's why. When I'm 25, I'm sure I can do it. The problem is the odds are against me. I know there are 25-year-olds who are billionaires. They're a very small fraction of the people who do this. And what you want is successful growth, not being jumped into a position. I had a client who talked once about being the winner of the sperm lottery. And some of you who are in family businesses get the joke. This ate on him because he was convinced that he got the job because he was the son, not because he was competent. He was really good. He was competent, he cared, but this doubt nagged him. So, what do? You say, I want to work in the business. What is the next step? And if the next step is to be CEO and you've never led any people, you say, wait a minute, I think there's some risk there. And I'm telling you, by the way, that if this is a company with more than 20 employees and you've never led a team and playing a college sport doesn't count, your risk of failure is enormously high. And the problem is if you fail, you will either be fired or you will bring the business down. Either one of those is awful. So be willing to say, I'm ready. Now, what do I need to develop? How do I need to get better? And if you move this to the sports field and say, so what does it take to get better? And the answer is the people who perform beautifully work incredibly hard at getting better. They seek out real feedback, and we can pick whoever your hero is. And what you'll find underneath that hero is a willingness to do the work in order to be able to play the game well. There are a few people who don't have to work hard. Don't assume you are one. If you are, it'll be a happy surprise. Did that help?
I think so.
Okay. Other questions, or do we move on?
I don't have any more right now, but a reminder, we have a Q&A box on the screen there. If you have any questions, please type
Yes, please do that. So what we were talking about here is if you're the parent, what are the questions you want to learn about your son or daughter as a candidate for senior leadership in the business or president or CEO? So moving on, what have they learned about themselves? I would ask them. And if they won't talk to you, that tells you you're probably not going to be their coach. So somebody else needs to do that. Because if they have not learned yet about themselves, meaning what they're good at, and own that, and what they're not so good at, and gone to work on that, it's going to be a long, hard row. Because this job, as you know, is tough on a good day. And it should be clear in the conversation what they do well, and acknowledge that to them. Say, not only do we think so, but John and Sue and Bill have all said you have done a super job on X and Y. Because when you're 25 or 28 or 24, the task is to figure out who am I and can I be an adult? And so wins matter enormously for confidence, because confidence is the fuel for risk. Who is their mentor? I would ask them. And if you get a blank stare, that's a problem. There's all kinds of press about mentors. It's like lots of other good things. People read about it and say either I don't know one or I don't need one. And I'm here to say, yeah, you do. I've had mentors. I was forced into a circumstance when I first got out of school working in a very large corporation in Chicago. And there were mentors all over the place. I was in a very high profile job and I was very nervous. And there were people who would cruise up alongside and give me a hint or give me a nudge. And it was incredibly helpful. This was the grocery business, by the way, which is not known for grace or tact, but they were both. I would ask them, what do you want to do next? What job do you have your eye on? And when they say CEO, you say, yeah, but before that. Because the question for them is, what is the next job? So that you can ask, what do you need to develop in terms of skill or experience in order to do that job well? And then ask them, what does the company need from you? And I would ask your leaders, what do you need from this young person? One of my clients right now is a very successful business, substantial. Daughter is 26, and they're in this circumstance. She's, in my judgment, probably 4 years or 5 years away from being able to handle the job of CEO, and CEO is going to step back before then. And we're working on specific skills and behaviors for her. We've talked about them with her. She's incredible. I would hire her in a heartbeat. She works like crazy. She's smart. She's analytical. She gets along well with everybody. And her problem is that she doesn't want to say something unless it's a blockbuster. And we're trying to get her over that. Okay, I'm looking at where we are, looking at the time, and thinking, something I need to say is this, that there is no answer to this without compromise and risk. There's no fairy here. Nobody talks about this. The family was successful. The business is successful, therefore it's always going to be successful, and you are always going to be successful. And I'm putting words to that because when you hear me say that, you realize not necessarily. And so as a parent, one of the questions is going to be, how is this son or daughter about resilience? Meaning really taking a gut punch, not a kind of sort of, but a really tough one. Because the question is, have they had that kind of a really painful, I don't mean sort of painful, I mean knock you flat. What happened then? What happened then? Because if you've run a business, you know you've had that experience where you've been to the third lender and they've said no, and you're watching the cash disappear, and it is not pleasant, it is not exciting, it isn't fun, and how you figure out how to get out of that matters enormously. So we have some tools, which we'll talk about in a minute, but there are a couple of other ideas. But let's look at the next slide. Okay, so this is a shift. And let go of the idea that somehow I'm trying to pitch my tent here. I am a professional advisor. If somebody out of this conversation would like to work with me, we can talk about that. That's not what I'm saying this for. Here's why I'm saying this. A CEO of a family business typically has done well overall with a lot of pain and struggle. And that person has learned grit, discipline, and the willingness to get back up off the floor and find a new answer. And therefore, it's easy for them to say, this is just another easy step, no problem. What I would say every way I possibly can is no, this is actually brand new territory for you. You are not experienced in it unless you have already sold a business and bought another one and replaced the management and moved one of your kids into and out of the business. Most family businesses have not done this. So with all due respect, this is new territory for you. And we already talked about the emotional and financial risk of doing this wrong. This is also a multi-layered problem, and we've talked about some of the layers here. You have employees who've been with you for years, and you owe them the same kind of devotion they've given you for years. For example, you have customers who depend on you for their family income, and you owe them your best effort. And I could go on and on and on before we get into the problems in families where there are 5 kids, 2 are getting along well, 3 are fighting, and one of the 3 is actively trying to sabotage where you're trying to go. This is not unusual. People are people. And so another concern is you want your kids to be successful, and that's measured in a number of ways, including money. And I don't need to give you that speech, but that's a piece of this. You own a portion, but certainly not all of it. You also want your business to be successful because it's your legacy. And while it's difficult to admit that you have a legacy, because that's just for old people, you do. And the question is, after you leave, what did you leave behind? What kind of operation is this? What's its reputation? What is its position in the community? And that actually is quite important, not just emotionally, but because if you guided your kids into a business which comes apart underneath them, it's a terrible event. Yes, they'll get over it, but you don't want to do that. And finally, this may seem corny, income when you're retired actually matters. It's way easier to be retired with enough money than not. And how you construct the business will impact the amount of money you get. And I don't mean to be crass. I mean that it's important. And you can simply say we want a healthy business that takes care of all of its stakeholders. That will produce income to us. So, advisors, here is a tricky one. You should have a professional attorney, CPA, and financial planner. They are different. If your CPA is your financial planner, get a financial planner. There are lots of them. Get a for-fee financial planner. And the reason is that there will be a time when you will get some money from the business that you don't now have. And most of us need help in managing that well because it's complicated and difficult. So that's the first 3, a CPA, a lawyer, and a financial planner. Now, one of the problems is that they're not enough. I've described them as narrow and deep, if they're good. So your first question for each of them is, have you been involved in the sale or transfer of ownership in a business? If they have not, get somebody who knows how to do it. You would not go to a hospital and have a surgeon do an operation on you that the surgeon has never done. You just wouldn't do that unless you had no choice. And this is happily not surgery, but it's close in terms of risks. But get somebody who's done it. The same thing is true for your accounting professional and your financial planner. The question is, where will your assets go? And will they go to a size where you're really beyond the competence of the financial planner? The ethical ones will say, we need to get you hooked up with somebody who's used to working at this level. Beyond that, there are 2 other advisors that are critical, in my opinion. If you're going to sell the business, you need to find, in my opinion, again, someone who does this for a living at businesses in your size, who has a track record with people you can talk with. And here is why. If a business is sold, there will be a process of preparing it for sale, which takes some time, and we're not talking about selling the business today. It's about filling the gap. But this impacts the gap because selling the business may mean recapitalizing part of the value of the business, and that was one of the questions that people ask. And yes, there are people who will take a minority share. What they do is the same thing as buyers, which is they want to understand the financials, the leadership. They want to understand the sales potential. What are the products? Who are the markets? What are the channels? They want to understand how deep the balance sheet is. They want to understand where the warts are and so forth. so that they can come up with the value of the business. And if the value of the business is, let's say, $10 million, and they want to buy a 25% share, that is $2.5 million. This is not mystical. Here's the problem. Buyers will do what you do when you buy something, which is to check, is it what they say it is? This is not about being crooked, but most businesses are complicated enough so that their financials, their sales pipeline and management process, the skill of their leaders, all are good but not great. So you need, in my opinion, at least an investment advisor who has done this enough to say to you, that weakness is okay, this weakness you need to address. And in simplest terms, you should have audited financial statements for 3 years before there is a transfer of ownership. And you're wondering, why am I talking about transfer of ownership when we're talking about filling the gap? Because the answer is, at some point, there's going to be some device which gets you money to retire. And that's a part of this transfer. And when that happens, if you're not well prepared, meaning you have good advisors, the buyer will bring in people who do, it's called due diligence, which is a benign term. What that means is they're running a plow through everything they can find to see what the real risks are. And you can't blame them. They're putting their money into the business. You want to have discovered those and done what is needed to avoid the following kind of scenario. A business is a family business, an excellent, substantial size. I had a real offer to sell for $120 million. And it was the buyer had the money, the buyer had all of the obvious things were fine. The buyer, and it looked like this deal was going to happen, the buyer brought in specialists from Ernst & Young. The eventual sales price was $35,000 less. Now, they still had plenty of money, but they watched that money go out the door, and could they have prevented that loss? Yes, most of it. So preparation is critical. So if your advisors aren't used to playing in this league, find people who have, and please do that. The final piece of this is that the strength of the leadership of the business without you directly impacts the value of the business. If you don't have a management team, that costs you one EBITDA. That would be $5 million in our example. If you don't have a general manager, that costs you another EBITDA. If you don't have, that's two, that's now $10 million in valuation. And if you haven't 3 years of audited financials, that's another EBITDA. That's $15 million you won't get, and that you could have prevented by taking action. So that's why you want advisors who understand this game. This is a different world than operating a business. So let's stop. I want to be sure. Are there any questions?
I don't have any right now.
All right, so let's keep going. So let's go to the next slide and talk about,
This one.
thank you, yes. So the successor leadership process, of course you include interested kids as candidates. Why wouldn't you? If it were me, however, I would try to find outside candidates. That means people who are outside the company, and if there is somebody in the company who is a candidate, I would include them. The obvious answer is, if you don't include somebody who thinks they should have been included, the message they get is you don't count and your time is numbered, and they're going to be looking for a job, not what you want. You also want your kids to know how it works out in the world. And how it works is there are several candidates, there are discussions back and forth, looking for a fit. So include them. And here are some questions that are included in the, is your kid going to be a successor? So one of them is, which kid gets my job, right? I have 3 kids, they're all bright, they all want it. And so I would make it clear who is going to make that decision. And in most companies, the CEO is the person who finally makes that decision. Once in a while, it's the board. It is almost never the ownership group. This is tough. Because if, as the mom, you have not established that, there's going to be a discussion, but I would urge you to make it clear back years before that you are the one who is going to make that call. You may not do it perfectly, but that's the way the best people do it. And I talked a little bit about how to train my son or daughter to be a good CEO. And the answer is put them to work. Explain to them that the things that matter are things like the willingness to work hard, to get up off the table, to listen carefully, to get people to want to work with you, to be curious, to have the willingness to do what it takes to get the result. That is not the same as saying, I worked 50 hours last week, and the answer to that is, who cares? What was the result? Because they may have spent 50 hours doing a 20-hour job and gotten a mediocre result, and you all know there are people in the business like that. So what if my kid can't or won't be CEO? You should have long since made it clear that this is one life path. I mean long since, like when they're 10. If not, point out that there's only one CEO and there's 5 kids in the family. 4 of you are not going to be CEO for at least for a while. So for everybody, who are you? What's important to you? What do you enjoy? What are your gifts? How can you bring your gifts to the world? Those kinds of questions which seem obvious, you must have those conversations. And in the course of that, one possibility would be to lead the family business. The gleam of the CEO of the family business is so bright that it will take years of talking about who are you to your son or daughter to dim it enough so that they have a chance to do what really fits them. And you don't want them to do it if it's not going to be something that they're excited about. One of the questions is, well, who will fill the space that I leave behind? And well, you think we've talked about that. I'm trying to point to the space because that's a shock. It just is. It's rationally, at some point I'm going to step aside. But when you say there is going to be a space, who fills it, that helps you describe the space. And as we've discussed, begin to talk about what are the key skills and behaviors for the person filling that space. How do we develop leadership skills in our kids? And the answer is put them in organizations and ask them to learn how to influence other people. Influence is a way of helping, by the way. Colin Powell said, when your enlisted men stop coming to you for advice, you stop being their leader. So leaders are people who help other people with their agendas, meaning the people's agendas, not the leaders' agendas. Now, you can translate what I just said to your kids. It goes on in class at school. It's in a group of 3 people who are studying in a study group. There are lots and lots of places to learn about leadership, which is influencing and contributing and lifting up the other person, which is a leader's job, by the way. When do we decide it's not our kid? Well, we've talked about a screening process, about the importance of advisors. I would use them. I would ask the management team or your key leaders in the business to do a frank assessment of your kid, and if they don't want to tell the kid, to tell you. Get some outside advice to help dilute your parental pride, and hopefully you feel proud. Well, where do we get our next leader, inside or outside? And I've already spoken to this, and the answer is you look for the right leader. And they're hard to find, inside the company, outside the company, in the family, and you keep looking till you find them. Okay, some tools that are on the bottom of this slide, these are outlined in more detail in a handout which you can get from the Austin Family Business Center, as Roger has explained. A quarterly leadership review. Well-run companies every quarter review the leadership situation of 1/4 of their key leaders, and they typically go down 2 or 3 levels. CEO, direct reports. And that's a group of maybe 20 people. And so every quarter, if you have 20 people, you look at 5 people, and you look at what are they good at in terms of skills and behaviors, not knowledge. What are they good at? What is the one thing they need to work on to develop themselves further as leaders? Write it down, talk about it with them, and work with them. And it's their supervisor's job to help them get better. That's essentially the quarterly leadership review. Key skills evaluation is another form, and it's focused on skills which people typically don't talk about much, but which I think are central. And they are rating them on a scale of 1 to 10. This is a tool for this quarterly evaluation. How do they rate on strategic acuity, on analytic skill, on leadership, which is the willingness of others to follow them, and performance, how good are they at getting results. Now, you can add your own, but I'm trying to put dimensions of leadership in here which are normally not considered, which really are the things that strong leaders do. And then the third is a family plan.
Jim, I don't want to interrupt, but we have 5 minutes. I do have 2 questions.
Oh, we have, oh, great.
Tackle those real quick.
Yeah, of course. Yes, let's do it right now.
In the family plan document, as Jim said, I'll email those out. But we had, here's 2 questions, and we can hit these kind of quick, and we can address these after if there's more time. Do we have any tips or tricks to attract and retain key leadership roles, specifically vice presidents, when the second generation has recently taken the president role and there is clearly no room for advancement?
Oh, interesting. Okay, first, yes, there is room for advancement. You assume that your kid is God, typically not the case. And I would operate a business in which case I believe that there is always room for advancement. The message otherwise is I'm going to be here forever and I can handle anything, and of course that's nonsense. I would be willing, this is me, to do 2 things. I talked about an internal review process. This is the quarterly leadership review, and I would actually do that, require that as an owner. You can do that. And what that will do is give you a sense of, do we have any candidates? There usually are candidates. They can be rough. They can be 2 levels down, but you can identify them and start to grow them. I would also ask of the CEO, what are the leadership positions that need to be filled in the next 3 years? You can identify positions, not people, but positions where the incumbent is going to retire. The incumbent's spouse is ill, and they may have to leave sooner. They've peaked and they're frankly kind of tired and would like a smaller job. You can create the list of, there are always reasons, but the CEO's job is leadership team. It's ahead of everything else. I consulted with and coached the CEO of a $500 million software business, and one of the main things we talked about was how to require of his key reports that they perform as the business needed rather than him doing it. So you look outside. If necessary, get a search professional, because you're going to say, well, they're going to cost me $30,000. I'm going to say to you, if you have a weak performer in that job, what will it cost your valuation? Remember, we went through that at the beginning. And if your operating earnings drop in half, that valuation drops in half. That's way more than the cost of a search professional.
And then quickly, we have time for one more, and this maybe is just room for some comments. General statement here, question. What about siblings working together? In my case, 2 sons as partners in the business. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm assuming that they're young adults as opposed to being 10 and 11. And there's no answer. I would observe them. If they are able to work together and they have complementing skills, then I would talk with them and ask them, do you want to? That's the first question. It's not up to you, Dad. It's up to them. And then if you won't, I would get a professional and their advisors who can evaluate them. The Hogan an analytic process is a particularly sophisticated one to identify strengths and weaknesses, to see whether the 2 of them actually can work together. And then, as an owner, you can say, and when they're not working well, fix this.
Okay, and so we're about out of time. We do have to stop at 1, but there's something I want to mention, Jim, that you have here for everybody who's on the line. I'm just going to bust through here. So Jim has a new book out, The Leader Architect, like fresh off the presses.
Right, yes.
Days. And he would like to offer it as a complimentary copy to anybody who's interested. So if you're interested in getting a copy of Jim's book, simply send me an email. My email is up on the screen. I think my email is also available in the WebEx notes if you can't find that. Or you can always just call our office, 541-737-6017, and I can drop one of those in the mail to you at no charge. So Jim, thank you very much.
Of course.
And then, so sorry, we're out of time. That was a lot of really good information. I'm going to put Jim's contact information up on the screen. If anybody has any questions, we're going to stop the official recording of the webinar. and we'll conclude it officially. But if anybody has any questions, please feel free to type them in, and we can hang out for a few minutes.